Think about the last time you left a crowded networking event.
Oh, yeah.
You probably weren't physically tired, but your brain just felt completely fried from like trying to read the room, figure out who was faking it, and pretend you had it all together.
Right, it's exhausting.
It really is. And we tend to think of this very specific uh, social burnout as a symptom of modern LinkedIn culture, or maybe our hyper-connected digital world.
Mm.
But today we're doing a deep dive into a forgotten French survival guide from 1810 that pretty much proves our ancestors were just as exhausted by fake people as we are today.
Yeah, it completely shatters the illusion that social maneuvering is like a recent invention.
For sure.
We're looking at a manual called L'homme de bonne compagnie, which roughly translates to the man of good company. And I think it's vital to note right up front that this is not it's not a superficial guide about which fork to use for the salad course.
Right, not just etiquette.
Exactly. Or, a precise angle required to bow to a duke. The tone of this text is remarkably calm and intensely analytical. It functions much more like a deep psychological dissection of integrity, our social duties, and, well, the rather dark underbelly of human nature.
Which is wild for 1810. So our mission for this deep dive is to zero in on a very specific section of the manual, pages 189 to 250. The entire section is dedicated to what the author calls commerce du monde, which translates to social commerce, or like the business of society.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
And we are going to extract this centuries-old wisdom on fake honesty, the toxic mechanics of envy, and what it actually takes to show true merit. Because the way this 1810 text maps onto our social lives today is, it's almost eerie.
It really is. The author treats commerce du monde as a literal exchange of social currency.
Okay.
And just like financial commerce, if the currency is counterfeit, the whole system just collapses.
Oh, wow.
Right. That's why the text insists that before you even set foot in a crowded drawing room, you have to establish an unbreakable internal baseline. The manual calls this absolute necessity probité inalterable, or unalterable probity.
Okay, let's unpack this. Unalterable probity. That sounds like a massive, immovable block of stone or something.
It does sound heavy.
Yeah. So what does that actually look like in practice? Because if you're listening to this and thinking, I definitely smile at my boss's bad jokes or feign interest at office parties, is the author saying we have to be like brutally honest at all times and start insulting the appetizers to maintain our probity?
Not at all. The author is not advocating for rudeness here.
Good to know.
Basic politeness is just the grease on the wheels of society, right?
Right.
What's fascinating here is how the manual strictly contrasts unalterable probity with two very specific pitfalls. So you have fausse honnêteté, which is fake honesty, and complacent social complacence.
Yeah.
The distinction is really about your core values. Unalterable probity means your moral integrity does not shift based on like the temperature of the room or the status of the people in it.
Okay, that makes sense.
Complacence, on the other hand, is altering your core self simply to mirror what the room wants to see.
Right. So social complacence and fake honesty sound exactly like modern day toxic positivity.
Yes.
Or, superficial networking. Right.
Yeah.
Just smiling and agreeing with everyone to get ahead, which the author is explicitly warning against. So it's the difference between being polite and actively shape-shifting to gain favor.
Exactly. And the manual is pretty brutal about the consequences of that shape-shifting.
I bet.
It talks about hypocrites of virtue eventually being unmasked.
Wait, how exactly does the author think that unmasking happens? Does someone just eventually, catch them in a lie?
Well, it's more systemic than catching a single lie.
Oh.
Yeah. Think of maintaining fausse honnêteté, like running a massive battery-draining background app on your smartphone.
Oh, I love that analogy.
You're constantly calculating, right? Like, how am I being perceived? What does this person want to hear? How do I adjust my mask to align with the shifting winds of this conversation?
It's exhausting just hearing you describe it.
Exactly. The cognitive load of that social complacence is immense. The manual points out that eventually the system just crashes, the mask slips because no one has the energy to perform a counterfeit virtue indefinitely.
That makes so much sense of the exhaustion we talked about at the beginning. If you're running that background app of fake honesty, you just have 0% energy left for actual, genuine connection.
Precisely.
And the text suggests that understanding our true social duties means recognizing we owe society our genuine selves, grounded in that probity. Like, anything less is basically a betrayal of the basic social contract.
That's spot on. And if your foundation is just social complacence, you are entirely vulnerable to the external hazards of society.
Hazards.
Yeah, because even if you manage to secure your own unalterable probity, you're inevitably going to walk into a room full of people who are still operating on that shaky ground of fake honesty.
Ugh, true.
And when people feel insecure in their own standing, they lash out.
Which brings us to a really dark turn in the manual.
It does.
Once you're in the room, the text warns about the desire to harm and dedicates significant space to analyzing the specific character of envy. It uses this fascinating phrase, the exaggerations of envy. And here's where it gets really interesting, because when I read that, I immediately thought of doom scrolling.
Really? How do you mean?
Well, think about looking at a rival's perfectly curated social media feed. If you're feeling envious, you don't just objectively acknowledge their success, right?
No, never.
Your brain starts completely distorting reality. You start, like, exaggerating their flaws in your head or convincing yourself their success is entirely unearned, just spinning these wildly blown out of proportion narratives.
Right.
You exaggerate to balance the scales in your own mind.
That is an incredibly accurate parallel to the 1810 text. I mean, envy cannot survive objective reality, so it relies on distorted magnification.
Wow.
In a 19th century French salon, those exaggerations took the form of whispered rumors and subtle character assassinations. Today, like you said, it's subtweets, passive-aggressive comments, or just the mental gymnastics you just described.
Yeah.
The mechanism of human nature is identical. The envious person feels a deficit in themselves and attempts to artificially elevate their status by exaggerating the faults of the person they envy, which feeds that desire to harm.
Okay, so if we know the room is full of people willing to use the exaggerations of envy against us, how does the author suggest we actually protect ourselves from these exaggerations and impulsive first movements?
Yeah.
Because the text explicitly warns against having bad tempers and the harmful effects of acting on our first movements. And I assume first movements means our knee-jerk impulses, right? Like, if someone is spreading an exaggerated, envious rumor about you, the first movement is usually to strike back defensively.
It is. The manual recognized a profound biological truth long before we had, like, the modern neuroscience to explain it.
Really?
Yeah, a first movement is pure amygdala. It's the primitive fight-or-flight response triggered by a perceived threat to our social status.
That makes total sense.
Right, so when you hear an envious rumor, your first movement is usually anger, retaliation, or just immediate defense. But the author provides a very specific, demanding antidote to this toxic cycle, which is serious examination.
Okay, so instead of firing off that angry reply email the second you read it, or snapping back at a passive-aggressive comment in a meeting, you just pause.
You force a pause. By demanding serious examination, you are literally forcing your rational brain, your prefrontal cortex, to take the steering wheel back from your emotional reflexes.
Wow.
You refuse to trust initial gossip, and more importantly, you refuse to trust your own impulsive reaction to it. You ask, what's the source of this rumor? What is their motivation?
Right.
Is this grounded in reality, or is this merely the exaggeration of an envious mind?
I love that. By slowing down your own social reaction time, you completely neutralize the power of the envious circle. You just refuse to play their game on their terms.
Exactly.
But, that only really solves the defensive side of the equation. It stops you from getting dragged into the mud.
Right.
If we aren't supposed to play the game of fake honesty and we're just quietly neutralizing rumors, how do we actually show people we have value? Like, how do you succeed in this commerce du monde without coming across as totally passive?
Yeah, this is where the text draws an incredibly sharp, unforgiving line between true merit and false appearances.
Okay.
The author doesn't settle for just being a quiet, polite observer. The manual advocates for aiming at what it calls sublime examples of superior merit and greatness of soul.
Sublime examples.
And it contrasts these sublime examples with the contemptible maneuvers of some socialites.
Oh, I absolutely love that phrasing, contemptible maneuvers. So what does this all mean? What exactly did a contemptible maneuver look like in 1810?
Well, picture a crowded salon in Paris.
Okay, I'm there.
A contemptible maneuver would be artificially laughing too loudly at a duke's joke.
Well, classic.
Or strategically dropping the names of aristocrats you barely know. Or feigning deep expertise on a political subject you literally just heard about 5 minutes prior.
Yikes.
It's any shallow tactic used to artificially inflate status without doing the foundational work. Today, it's the humble brag on LinkedIn, or casually name-dropping a CEO at a networking event.
It's projecting an image of importance to cover up a lack of substance.
Exactly.
So we have sublime merit on one hand and contemptible maneuvers on the other. It sounds like the author is calling out the original posers, people who just play the social game without actually having any greatness of soul.
Yes, and the text attempts to explain why true merit, this greatness of soul, is so remarkably rare.
Why is it?
Well, this raises an important question because the author pairs this pursuit of sublime merit with a concept that might throw you off. The manual explicitly advises young people to cultivate a very useful self-distrust.
Wait, useful self-distrust. That sounds like a recipe for total social paralysis.
It does, doesn't it?
Yeah. I mean, if I'm stepping into a crowded room of industry leaders, how do I project confidence if a survival manual is telling me to actively doubt my own motives?
On the surface, it feels entirely counterintuitive, especially today when our modern mantra is, trust your gut and believe in yourself unconditionally.
Exactly.
But you have to look at the nuance the author is drawing between paralyzing insecurity and intellectual humility. The arrogant socialite pulling contemptible maneuvers never doubts themselves.
That's true.
They are entirely consumed by the brilliance of their own performance.
They're too busy projecting the image to ever reflect on the reality.
Exactly. But the person striving for a greatness of soul knows that their own perception is fallible. They distrust their own first movements.
Right.
They ask themselves, am I reacting out of pride right now? Am I stating this opinion because I actually believe it or because I want to sound smart to the person next to me? Am I being totally honest with myself? That very useful self-distrust prevents you from sliding back into the trap of fake honesty. It keeps your ego in check and allows for genuine growth.
It really reframes the whole concept of imposter syndrome.
It really does.
If you're listening to this and you often feel a pang of self-doubt in professional or social settings, maybe that isn't a weakness. The manual is essentially saying that a certain degree of doubting yourself is the exact mechanism that keeps you grounded in reality, while everyone else is floating away on the hot air of their own egos.
Right. It's the internal friction that keeps you from spinning out into self-delusion. Without that self-distrust, your probity cannot remain unalterable because you'll eventually start lying to yourself to justify your own contemptible maneuvers.
This is so fascinating. Okay, so we've built our internal foundation of unalterable probity. We're ignoring the exaggerations of envy by pausing our first movements. We're cultivating true merit through this very useful self-distrust. I mean, it is an immense amount of work. Why put ourselves through this rigorous, constant self-interrogation? The final section of our deep dive explores the ultimate payoff of the manual's roadmap, which is the legacy and reputation you leave behind.
Yes, the manual culminates by exploring the sheer necessity of a good reputation. But it's very careful to distinguish a truly virtuous reputation from what it brilliantly calls unimportant worldly noises.
Unimportant worldly noises. That is such a poetic, almost dismissive way to describe gossip, trending topics, or like fleeting social status. It's all just the static of the room.
It is the static of the commerce du monde. People constantly confuse being talked about, generating worldly noise, with having an actual good reputation.
Oh, definitely.
You can generate worldly noise through fake honesty and contemptible maneuvers. But the manual argues that a true reputation is built silently over a lifetime through consistent, unalterable probity.
Wow.
And to drive this massive point home, the author invokes a highly specific historical example from classical antiquity. The manual brings up the regrets of Pliny the Younger upon losing a virtuous friend.
This detail really stopped me in my tracks. For context, if you aren't familiar, Pliny the Younger was a prominent Roman author, lawyer, and magistrate who lived in the 1st century AD. His surviving letters give us a huge amount of insight into Roman life. But think about the incredible span of history happening in this text.
Right.
We're reading an etiquette manual from 1810, written in France, and the author reaches across almost 2 millennia, all the way back to ancient Rome, just to prove a point about reputation.
And it's vital to understand what Pliny was actually mourning in the writings the author references.
Okay.
Pliny wasn't upset because he lost a valuable networking contact or someone who could elevate his social standing in the Roman Senate.
Right.
He was mourning the loss of a pillar of unalterable probity. He felt a piece of the world's moral fabric had been torn. The manual uses his profound grief to show that the pain of losing a genuinely virtuous person and the immense, irreplaceable value of that kind of true reputation transcends empires and centuries.
It shows that the pain of losing a genuinely virtuous friend and the immense value of that kind of unalterable reputation is a totally universal human experience. Underneath the togas of ancient Rome or the tailored suits of 19th century Paris, or the tech bro vests of today, the core human desire for genuine connection is completely universal.
Absolutely.
The 1810 author is trying to tell us that those worldly noises, the fleeting gossip, the loud laughter of the socialites, the temporary victories of fake honesty, they all inevitably fade into total silence.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the book is teaching us that worldly noises evaporate. What survives, what echoes across centuries, is a good reputation built on actual virtue. And the text concludes this entire section by stating that this kind of lasting legacy is achieved through the ultimate duties of a man of merit, which are a severe examination of oneself and a serious examination of life.
A severe examination of oneself that brings us full circle right back to the beginning of the text. You can't just coast through society on autopilot. You have to constantly interrogate your own motives.
Yeah. You have to be your own harshest critic so that society doesn't have to be.
Oof.
By applying that severe examination to yourself, by utilizing that useful self-distrust, you ensure that your probity remains unalterable. You ensure that when people remember you, they aren't remembering a performance or a fragile mask, but a genuine person.
It is a heavy but incredibly beautiful thought. It entirely strips away the modern transactional view of networking.
Completely.
It's not about collecting contacts to leverage later. It's about cultivating a character that is actually worth knowing. It's about making sure that the social currency you're trading in this commerce du monde is backed by the gold standard of your own integrity.
That is the only way the system of society functions without exhausting everyone involved. It must be an exchange of genuine value, not a superficial exchange of masks.
So let's pull all of these centuries-old threads together. This 1810 manual has essentially handed us a timeless psychological roadmap for surviving and thriving in society.
It really has.
First, you have to build your foundation on unalterable probity.
Right.
Without it, you're doomed to the exhausting, battery-draining performance of fake honesty and social complacence.
Right.
Second, you have to expect the external hazards. When you encounter the exaggerations of envy or feel the biological urge to react to your first movements, you have to deploy serious, critical examination to force your rational brain back into control.
And third, you must actively pursue true merit, that greatness of soul, by embracing a very useful self-distrust.
Yes.
You have to let go of the arrogant, contemptible maneuvers of the posers and socialites and choose intellectual humility instead. And finally, you have to remember that your ultimate goal is a legacy of genuine virtue. You are aiming for a reputation that cuts through the unimportant worldly noises.
A reputation that would make even Pliny the Younger proud. It's a demanding standard, but it really feels like the only viable cure for that deep, bone-weary social exhaustion we talked about at the very beginning. If you stop running the background app of fake honesty, you get your energy back.
You really do.
So I want to turn this directly to you, the listener. The next time you're navigating a tricky social situation or stepping into a crowded professional networking event, check your internal baseline.
Good advice.
Ask yourself, are you relying on false outward appearances, or are you practicing unalterable probity? Are you just adding to the static of worldly noise, or are you doing the quiet, severe examination required to build true merit?
It's the ultimate test.
It is. And I want to leave you with one final lingering thought to mull over. We just saw how a conduct manual from 1810 had to rely on the emotional letters of a Roman magistrate from the first century just to explain how to survive local social circles. It proves that the core mechanics of human nature, our anxieties, our envy, our susceptibility to fake people, and our deep desire for genuine connection haven't changed an inch in thousands of years. So fast forward. Think about the future. What will a conduct manual in the year 2210 say about our social commerce today? Will they look back at our curated digital feeds and subtweets as a warning about the ultimate unimportant worldly noises, or will they have found some new modern equivalent of unalterable probity to guide them through the noise?